Good evening. This is Brown at IF Brown. Hope everyone's doing all right tonight. Halloween is almost upon us, and so I decided to take a shot at reviewing this little number from the Abyss horror line that Dell had put out in the early 90s. And this was, in fact, book number 5 of that particular horror imprint. And the book in question is Prodigal by Melanie Tem. Just take a sec to look at the cover art here. One of the things about this particular horror line is that most of the cover art tended to be very evocative on a purely psychological level. I mean, you look at this and you got the outline of of a house, and then you see this twisted figure curled up on the inside, just screaming, and what may well be existential agony. But this was actually a very, very well done horror novel. Or I guess, it's also my first time reading anything by Melanie Tem, and by all accounts, she was a very good writer. She definitely had quite a few horror novels in her resume. But at the same time, she didn't just write horror novels. Like, she wrote, sort of like, dark fantasy, things like that. And I definitely want to check out more of her stuff in the near future, hopefully. But yeah, so this was my first time reading something by her. But I was kind of saddened to learn that she passed away in 2015 due to breast cancer. So cancer sucks. But yeah, no, she definitely left behind a large body of work. And Prodigal, while it was the first book that I've read by her, I'm not 100% sure, but it might have actually been her first novel as well. So if that's the case, I mean, double victory, because I was wowed upon completing this book. And if this was her first time indeed writing a full-length novel, then she did very well. And this novel definitely earned its spot in the Abyss horror line, and it also did a good job of going along with the mission statement that the horror line initially had about focusing on a more psychological direction of horror, in which say there could definitely be supernatural elements, but at the same time there'd be more of a focus on the twisted nature of human emotion and psychology thrown into the mix. But yeah, so let's kind of get into the actual story here. I'm kind of fanboying, but so anyway, the main character of Prodigal is a very young girl named Lucy. She's very preteen, like 11, 12, I believe. Anyway, though, her family has been through a rather traumatic event. Her older brother Ethan was a juvenile delinquent, and he recently was found dead. But one of the things that's been going on is that even before they found out for sure that he was dead, because he had run away from home, as well as from the juvenile facility which he was being housed at. He appeared to not only Lucy, but to Lucy's mother, as a sort of zombie-like wraith almost. And the thing is, Lucy, initially she thought that she was the only one who was seeing him, but her mother was seeing seeing Ethan as well. And so when they find out that he is dead, had the funeral and everything, that doesn't necessarily, stop, Lucy from seeing him. And, things get, progressively, more, disturbing when her older sister, Ray, goes missing as well. And, Ray was heading in a similar direction as Ethan, in a sense that she was having, tendencies that a juvenile delinquent would have. And, her family, their family, is, kind of, on one hand, they're trying to cope with Ethan's passing, but then, when, Ray's, exhibiting similar behavior, that just kind of adds to the stress. And Lucy, she's seeing how, her mom and dad, they're not as, omniscient as, she initially thought that they were, because most little kids, there's a period of time in which they think that their parents are all powerful, like nothing can harm them, and they in turn won't let anything harm the children. But unfortunately, Ethan's death has shown Lucy at a very young age that life has a way of hurting everyone. And her parents are just, she's seeing them in ways that she had never seen them before, in very vulnerable states. And also she's seeing how this is affecting her siblings too, because she, and it's also affecting how she perceives them as well, because she loves her family, but at the same time, all the focus has been on Ethan, who is dead, and as well as Ray, who is just causing more and more drama. And she's she loves her family, but she's starting to hate them too, because no one's paying any attention to her, or at least as far as she can tell. And so when she's in school, she just kind of zones out, and people make fun of her as the weird kid whose family has problems with their children dying, because unfortunately, not too long after Ethan's dead, Ray goes missing. And then deja vu, Lucy starts seeing her zombie-like specter, except this time, whereas Ethan seemed to be making some sort of effort to try and communicate, but wasn't able to, he wasn't able to say anything, and instead would just lash out at her, and her mother, and Ray's specter is actually capable of speaking, and she acts like Ray, as Lucy knows her, very rude, condescending, but at the same time she just keeps disappearing. But the thing is, her father, Lucy's father, is seeing her as well. And whereas her mother was the one who was also seeing Ethan, and having harsh interactions with his spirit, or ghost, if you will, her father is the one who's also seeing Ray, and is having harsh interactions with her. And so it's just, all this stuff is happening, and the family, Lucy and her, doesn't want to believe that Ray's dead too, but considering that seeing her ghost is kind of a good sign is kind of a sign of someone being dead. That's kind of where she's heading. And as far as her conclusion goes, And her family is just becoming even more chaotic because of all this, because they don't want to admit to the possibility, because I mean, they don't know what happened to her, they don't know where she's gone. But it's just all these things keep happening. And then also, there is a guidance counselor, or just a counselor for children in general, but who has a lot of interactions with the family, and he frequently interacted with both Ethan and Ray. But the thing is, Lucy gets involved with him as well, as do several other children that she knows. And while he initially seems to have everyone's best interests at heart, but the parents of the children and the children themselves, Lucy starts to see that this guy might have some dark motives that she can't quite comprehend, but there's a part of her that knows that there's a danger there. And when she starts to look into things more, just from looking around her, there's a distinct possibility that both Ethan and Ray may have met a dark fate at this counselor's hands, considering what she's seen over there, and the fact that he has such a persuasive hold on not only the children but the parents as well. But yeah, so she's at a spot where on one hand she's just seeing all this disturbing almost dreamlike imagery, except it's not just a dream or a hallucination, because these things interact with her. But then at the same time, there's like this flesh and blood danger as well that has its own seductive appeal, not only for her but for the children around her that are in this communal counseling group for grief-stricken kids or problem children. And unfortunately, Lucy has become a bit of a problem child because of her confusion and anger and depression at what's been going on with her family. And her parents put her in this program, but she's come to realize that unfortunately, while her parents might mean well, I mean, because of what's been going on with them and their mental turmoil, they may well have just handed her over to a rather grave threat. So this was a novel that I really appreciated reading. One of the unique things about it is that not only is Lucy the protagonist, but the reader literally sees from her perspective the entire time. Not quite first person, but you literally only see from Lucy's perspective, though. And considering that she is a very young girl, Melanie Tem does a phenomenal job of capturing a lot of the confusion that comes at such a young age to children, whether you're a boy or a girl. I mean, there's a time in every person's life when they're a kid in which they think that their parents or authority figures can do no wrong or can cause no harm or can protect them from harm. But then something happens in which that perspective is just kind of shattered. And some some kids handle it better than others, but when it's of such a harsh nature as, say, a death in the family, someone that, say, a child is close to, it can really mess them up. And you factor that in, along with the fact that a lot of kids, and myself included, when I was a kid, I remember there were plenty of times where, I mean, I always had a vivid imagination, but sometimes I would see things, and I mean, nowadays, I look back and I'm just like, oh, I imagined it. But at the same time, though, there's just enough, that's gone on in my life to where I've wondered. I mean, did I really see something that I thought I did? Or because some of this stuff is just dark and bizarre, and granted, though, I mean, just about every kid, I think, has that kind of perspective on life, where they see something, but they don't really understand what it was that they saw. And so there's this sort of, either dreamlike or nightmarish, feel to it. And, how this all just ties into, the book is, basically that Melanie Tem did a very good job of conveying that, childlike perspective on life, as well as, just that confusion and that, ambiguity of, a kid's perspective on things at such a young age. And so you have all that going on, and then you have not only the death in the family, but you have these, specters, or these, wraith-like, creatures, if you will, that are seem to want to, communicate, with her, and her, parents, but at the same time, they're hostile, they're dangerous. And so, for a little kid to have to experience something like that, is beyond nightmarish. And, there were several moments wherein, I felt, Lucy's terror at the situation, especially when she sees how her parents are more or less helpless, whether it just be, in terms of, their interactions with these, creatures as well, or just in, trying to handle life after losing one of their children, altogether, because, I mean, there were several instances wherein, like Lucy would see her mom, vacuuming, say for instance, like she'd be doing some household chores, at work, and she'd think that she was the only one in the house, not knowing that Lucy was there, and she just, breaks down and starts screaming. And so to see something like that when, one is a little kid, to see, someone who's a parent, or one of your parents, having that sort of, reaction to something, it's just, I mean, I can only imagine, just how, shattering it could be for a kid's perspective, I mean, and for the character of Lucy, I mean, just, you really feel for her, because, I mean, while it's a childlike perspective throughout the whole book because it's being written from the kid, I mean, when you're seeing, just the dark side of life, just, hitting her and her family, I mean, you not only feel sorry for her, but you feel for her family as well. Because, I mean, the family initially, they tried to put up this, almost, I'll just call it Facebook facade. It's like, people, they put their best faces out on Facebook, or just, pictures in general, saying, hey, we're a happy family, everything's fine. But, behind all that, there's all this, drama. And, then, in this case, though, it just, you have the death in the family that, sort of, took everything up to 11. And then you have, Lucy not being sure of what she's seeing, and all the confusion that comes with her being a young girl, or just a young kid in general. But then, of course, with all that going on, you have a very real world element of danger, in the sense that there's someone who has some twisted designs on not only Lucy, but just children in general. And unfortunately, this particular individual is in a position of authority in which, not only kids trust him, but the parents of those kids trust him. And so, you have something like that going on, and you realize that there have been a lot of abusers of children who have been in, very similar positions of authority and have used those positions to, abuse kids, and it's horrifying. And so, the idea of that is horrifying enough. And you see an episode of, say, Law and Order SVU or something like that, and yeah, it's just very disturbing, to say the least. Whether you have a kid or not, just imagining that, it's horrifying. But then, you take that situation and you look at it literally from a little kid's perspective, which is what's going on in this book. Since you're seeing everything from Lucy's perspective, you see how she's kind of drawn in, to this guy's, allure and charm, but then at the same time, you also, see that there's a part of her that realizes that something's wrong, and you see those two sides of her trying to, fight it out. And sometimes, sometimes the naive side wins out. She, gets further enveloped, in this guy's, darkness. But on the other hand, sometimes the part of her that's almost like a, primal level of caution wins out. And other times it's a little bit of both, and she seems to be, helped by something unnatural. Case in point, there's one moment where she's walking in the snow, getting ready to meet this guy, and she's lying about to her parents about where she's going to be, and it's around Christmas time, or it's Thanksgiving. It's around Thanksgiving, but it's snowing, and she sees letters in the snow at one point on the ground, and she realizes that the letters spell the word danger. And then that's when she starts seeing, her missing sister Ray, sort of, not quite within, touching distance, but, not like far off in the horizon or anything either. But it's just like, she doesn't know for sure if she's, there's enough ambiguity to where you don't know for sure if, her subconscious is trying to warn her, or if it's actually, her sister's, spirit, that's somehow able to, make some form of contact, regardless of whether or not she's actually dead as of yet. But you have moments like that, that sort of leave your mind wandering or reeling as well. And so it does a very good the book does a very good job of putting you into the mindset of a very young character who's going through a very dark time in their life, as well as having been exposed to a lot of darkness that no one should be exposed to. And I think that if there's anything that I would say would be a downside, is that considering the type of abuse that it's sort of implied, there's enough that goes that you're shown in the book to where that something of an abusive nature is going on, but at the same time there's Melanie Tem, it's like she shows just enough to where what's going on, but at the same time, she closes the curtain when things get, too intense or about to get too intense. It's like, Lucy, she sees something, and unfolding, and then, she is able to, hightail it out of there, right before she sees, something that she, wouldn't be able, she knows that she wouldn't be able to handle, on some level. But, it's almost like Melanie Tem's doing that, for the reader's sake as well. But, it was a very, nightmarish and yet intriguing, experience. I mean, just as a reader, I mean. But, so, I mean, just depending on, your tolerance for horror, just bear in mind that, because of the nature of, I guess you could say, what may or may be the antagonist of the book, I mean, there are some elements to that might be more than a little disturbing for some readers. But the other thing is that while Melanie Tem does a very good job of making things ambiguous, considering you're only seeing from one perspective, and you don't know if it's imagination or if it's real. I mean, she does a very good job of, keeping things ambiguous as far as perspective goes. But then towards the end of the book, there's a legitimately supernatural element that comes into play. And on one hand, I do like how when you get the explanation, it's a very rushed, explanation, but the way the reader and Lucy, finds out about this explanation, it's, because, she's only able to hear, just, the basics of it because she's in hiding. And so she hears what certain characters are saying, and she doesn't understand everything that's being said, but the reader does. And so, in lesser hands, a last minute, supernatural revelation, or I should say a last minute revelation of the supernatural, might have, come across as kind of a cop out. But there's just been enough, building up to, something darker than, everyday human evil in this book, that by the time that it's confirmed that there is a supernatural element to what's been going on, it's acceptable. And I myself, and, more than likely most of the other people who have read this book, accepted it as well. And so, I'm not going to say that, it's a bad thing or anything like that. It's just that, if you read the book, you'll get wrapped up in the, ambiguity of, whether or not Lucy's actually seeing, some of these things. And so by the time that there is a confirmation for some of it, and I'm not going to say all of it, but some of it, that clarity in some ways might be more of a con than a pro for some readers. But it just all depends on your perspective. And personally, I didn't mind it. Considering that this was a horror novel, I kind of gathered that there'd be something supernatural going on. And regardless of how active a kid's imagination is, there's no way that all of that could just be in her head. Some of it, yes, but not all of it. And that's one of the other things that I did appreciate about, I guess, this revelation, is in that it confirmed some of the things were supernatural in this book, but at the same time, there was just enough left unsaid, to where you're left wondering, okay, we understand the supernatural nature of, subject A, but what about subject B? I mean, there's definitely something going on there, but at the same time, there's, just enough, doubt, that's left to where, it's possible that, Lucy might have just, had a very, strange coping mechanism in terms of, what she saw and heard, on some things. But yeah, it was kind of a, mind warp of a horror novel. And it's not like outright stay up at night, terrifying or anything like that. But it is something that stays with you. And, considering how effective Melanie Tem was at, getting into the mindset of a child and, putting the reader, in the shoes of said child, throughout the entire novel. I mean, it's kind of jarring when you finish reading the book, or let's say you're reading the book a few chapters at a time, and you kind of have to stop and put the book down because, hey, real life calls. It's kind of jarring when you go from the horror of child of a strained childhood, and then you go to the mundane reality of the world around you. And that kind of jarring effect, for me at least, is a sign of a good writer, regardless of what genre the writer is in, because that shows that the writer did a very good job of bringing the reader into the book and getting the reader immersed in the story that they're going to tell. And I, for one, was definitely immersed in, Prodigal. I wish I could say I read it all in one sitting, but I wasn't able to do that. I had to, read it a bit at a time. But whenever I sat down to read it, I was invested. I cared about what was going on. I wanted to find out, what was going on. What was going on with Lucy, and I was wanted to see, okay, how's her family going to be able to cope with everything that's been happening and what have you. And so it's like a lot of the stuff that you see with the family was very relatable. I mean, especially if you've lost a loved one, or you've had problems with someone that I guess maybe a family member or a friend who is having problems that basically affect everyone around them, and they're being put into a spot where it's like they have to get help, whether they like it or not. But no, just a lot of relatable stuff going on with I guess the family side of things. And so it wasn't just Lucy, but it was her family in general that I found very relatable. And so but yeah, just this was an excellent novel, and I don't want to say much more about it, because I honestly, there are things about this novel that I don't want to spoil too much, because it is something that's worth reading, especially if you want kind of a mind warp of a horror novel, and Prodigal by Melanie Tem. It's definitely a mind warp of a horror novel. It's relatable. It's disturbing, but not gratuitously so. But it's disturbing in terms of how, I guess, relatable it is. From the perspective of a kid. But yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and give Prodigal 5 stars. It was an excellent novel. It was. I would, so far of the Abyss novels I've read, I would rank it up there with, Kathy Koja's The Cipher and Brian Hodge's Nightlife. And those were the first 2 books of the, Abyss horror line. And, Prodigal was book number 5, but, that's 3 great novels I've read, from this line so far. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. And thank you very much for taking the time to check out my review on Prodigal. And I would say also, just if you're looking for a horror writer to check out in general, definitely check out Melanie Tem. Like I said earlier, this is the only novel I've read by her so far, but I definitely want to check out some of her other stuff. But yeah, if y'all got any questions, comments, like what you've seen here, please drop a line. Feel free to hit that like button and subscribe as well if you have not already done so. But thank you very much again for taking the time to check out my review. I hope y'all enjoyed it, and y'all have a good evening, and happy soon to be Halloween. Good night.